Good morning. Boy, this isn't church, I can tell. But I do recognize the squad out here. Good morning and welcome to the press conference. As you know, and for those who don't, my name is Gerald Neal. I'm floor leader of the Kentucky Democratic Caucus. I have with me members of the caucus, including our caucus chair and our caucus whip. Caucus chair Reginald Thomas and our caucus whip and Cassie Chambers Armstrong and other members of the caucus as well. I'm glad they are here as well. Today marks the opening of the 2026 regular session of the Kentucky General Assembly. At the start of every session, we owe Kentuckians clarity about what is coming and honesty about what is at stake. This year, we are beginning under circumstances that demand both fiscal responsibility and moral seriousness. Decisions made in Washington are already shifting costs onto states, counties, and local communities. Our responsibility in Frankfort is to confront those realities head on and not pretend that they do not exist. The so-called Big Beautiful Bill is not abstract federal policy. It has direct consequences for Kentucky families. Broad federal cuts to Medicaid, SNAP, public health, and rural health supports do not make costs disappear. They shift those costs onto Kentucky taxpayers, county governments, and local service providers. Rural communities will feel this first and hardest. Rural hospitals, health departments, and emergency services rely heavily on federal pass-through dollars. While we appreciate the rural health care infrastructure funds Kentucky recently received, it pales in comparison to the amount of value in health care services Kentuckians stand to lose. When those dollars are pulled back, county judge executives, sheriffs, and local officials are left with impossible choices. I want to repeat that. When those dollars are pulled back, county judge executives, sheriffs, and local officials are left with impossible choices. Either services are cut or local taxes go up to fill the gap. That is not fiscal conservatism. That is passing the bill, or the buck, I should say, down the line. We are calling for full fiscal transparency. It's very important that folks be much aware of what's going on in real time. Transparency is key. Kentuckians deserve to see the real state and local tax impact of these federal decisions before further damage is done. Kentucky's minimum wage has not kept pace with the cost of living. Housing, child care, health care, and transportation costs have risen steadily in every part of the Commonwealth. Many employers already recognize this reality and pay above the statutory minimum, but still, too many working Kentuckians are still earning wages that do not meet basic household needs. When wages are too low, the burden does not disappear. It shifts to Medicaid, SNAP, and housing assistance. That means taxpayers are subsidizing employers who refuse to pay a living wage. Policies that encourage a living wage and helps low-income Kentuckians avoid the benefits cliff are the real way we should look to reduce the amount of Kentuckians relying on the social safety network. A living wage is not a job killer. I want to repeat that. A living wage is not a job killer. It is a workforce stability measure. It reduces turnover, strengthens local economies, and ensures that full-time work actually keeps family out of poverty. This is about fairness, fiscal responsibility, and respect for work. Education. Access to affordable, high-quality education, and childcare is one of the biggest barriers to workforce participation in Kentucky. Many counties are children deserts, particularly in rural areas. Parents cannot work if they cannot find safe, reliable care for their children. Employers cannot fill jobs if workers are forced out of the labor market. Universal pre-K and expanded child care are not social programs. I want to repeat that. Universal pre-K and expanded child care are not social programs. They are economic infrastructure. They are economic infrastructure. They strengthen our workforce today and improve educational outcomes tomorrow. If we're serious about economic growth, we must be serious about child care access. We support the governor's push for universal pre-K, but that is just one solution. Solutions like Senator Chambers Armstrong's child care tax credit helps put more money on families' tables while strengthening our workforce. There's broad agreement that we need more housing. I don't think there's anyone that fights against that. We are actually in a housing crisis. The real question is how we get there and who gets a seat at the table. You hear a lot about cutting red tape. Some processes can absolutely work better, but cutting red tape cannot mean cutting communities out of giving developers a free pass. Kentucky communities are different, and one-size-fits-all mandates from Frankfort won't solve a local housing shortage. Our caucus believes housing reform must be built on local control, transparency, and accountability. If permitting or zoning is streamlined, local governments must be full partners in those decisions. Local government must be full partners in those decisions. Cities and counties understand their infrastructure, neighborhoods, and housing needs better than anyone else. We also believe public policy should discourage speculation and ensure new development actually helps affordability, rather than driving prices up or displacing families. When proposals put developers ahead of homeowners, neighborhoods, and local voices, we will oppose them. Growth should strengthen communities, not override them. At the same time, we're optimistic. Oh yes, more stakeholders are engaged, and there's growing recognition that doing nothing is not an option. Our caucus is ready to work with anyone who wants to increase housing supply responsibility by respecting local control, protecting communities, and keeping housing policy focused on people, not just profit. The choices before us this session are clear. We can ignore cost shifting, pretend costs have no consequences, and leave local communities to clean up the mess. Or we can govern responsibly, demand transparency, and protect the people who keep Kentucky running. Senate Democrats will choose responsibility. We will stand with working families, local governments, healthcare providers, and communities across the Commonwealth. And we will make sure Kentuckians know exactly what is being decided in their name. Thank you. Are there any questions?
Can you give us a few specific examples of what Senate Democrats want to do on the housing crisis? I mean, we talked about, red tape, cutting red tape is not enough, but what specific policies are you hoping to pass this year?
Well, certainly there are issues in perhaps streamlining permitting. There are some barriers that are there that should be dealt with, I trust will be dealt with, but it has to be done in a responsible way. We want to make sure, and I must tell you, there was a task force on housing in which I sat, and I want you to understand that was not an easy distillation of information because it's not an easy process going forward. So I think what's going to happen is that we're going to have a debate, further discussion on this. We're going to have to engage the local communities with respect to this, and then come up with solutions that we think are useful and helpful. But I think eliminating some of the barriers that we can agree are not necessary or can be arranged in a different way that can facilitate the development, whether it's in urban or rural communities, is going to be helpful. The challenges in rural areas are not exactly like the challenges in urban areas. So we have to be sensitive to that, and that local input is going to be key to how that turns out.
You talked about shifting cost. I assume you mean Medicaid, SNAP, things of that nature. How much are we talking, and how could that impact this budget process?
Well, first of all, let's start with, we have a $156 million, at least is projected, or I think it's been assessed, $156 million deficit to begin with. Keep in mind that we have a situation now where we have gone from a 6% income tax down now to a 3.5. Now think about that for a minute, because it's more than $2 billion that we cannot get back from where we are now. But not only that, there's over $700 million with this next move on 3.5. So you see, there are pools of money that are different. Keep in mind that what we're also talking about is that sales tax, which is a regressive tax. And if you know what I mean by that, and for those who don't, is that that means the burden is more on those who make less as opposed to those who have more. That's a very common sense approach to understanding how you approach taxation. But sales tax is a regressive tax. And we have now increased that in terms of value and reliance. At the same time, we have a situation where we're saying let's not have more income tax, which in that sense can be distributed more, and I would consider it a progressive tax. So we're going in the opposite direction from where we are, and that burden is being shifted. Now, having said that, keep in mind that there's a major shift, and I think it's obvious, of resources and value and wealth toward those who really don't need it. You saw the big tax cut that they had last time, and that was renewed in the big, beautiful bill. That money is giving unnecessary money to the top, but guess what? And worse, it drains it from the bottom. Then at the same time, you see the cuts that are taking place. Cuts in SNAP, cuts in housing, cuts in healthcare, et cetera, across the board. That's a shift to the local economy. Now, that means in states and in local communities, now decisions have to be made to replace that money, eliminate that service, and some of them vital services, and or make some combination of the two. That burden has been shifted. That is a reality. We have to deal with that, or do we just coast with that? Serious decisions that have to be made. And there's another aspect to that, in effect, and that is, do we adopt policies locally? And we've already, there's some indications that we've gone down that road. When we start talking about the fraud, eliminating fraud and all this sort of stuff, who's for fraud? Of course we want to eliminate those things. But when we manage or put policies in position that restrict, make it difficult for people to access resources that they need, just on the functionality of it, I'm not sure that's a helpful way to go. So we got to be transparent about that. We got to talk about what it means. We got to talk about the real impacts in real time. And if we don't do that, then we're not doing what we're here to do. And what is our job here to do? Not to take care of ourselves, not to look good or look pretty, not to convince people that we know and have an answer to everything, because we don't. Not because we are here to say we got all the resources you want, you just ask for them, and if they're righteous requests, you get it. No, that's not what it is. We're here to serve our constituents. We're here to serve the public, and that's it. That's it. And we have to make sure that the public knows what we're doing, they understand the impacts of what's going on. There has to be complete transparency in this process, and we've got to meet these challenges head on. And if we do, I think we have a better chance for an outcome. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying Republican versus Democrat. I'm not going there. I'm not there. We all are elected, each of us, by roughly 115,000, give or take, 120,000, give or take. We all in the Senate are there of equal weight when we cast that vote. So we get into this whole thing about Republican, Democrat. Yes, when you have the majority and you come together as a caucus, you set the agenda. There's no question. But every vote counts. Every word that's spoken counts. Every time we commute with our, when we identify and talk with our constituency, it's just as powerful as anything else that's going down here. And that's what this is about. because we believe, and the reason we're here, and the reason why we accept the responsibility of representation is that it is important. It is a sacred duty. And every individual, whether you're a Republican or Democrat, has a responsibility to do it at the height of their capacity and with pure integrity. And that doesn't mean we won't make mistakes. We'll do that. So we don't, some people use that term, talking truth to power and all that stuff. No, the power is within each one of us. The people gave us the power and the charge to come here and do this work. And we have to do it, and we have to do it with integrity.
Earlier in your remarks, you talked about having full fiscal transparency in the budget process. Can you sort of elaborate what that looks like and what you'd like to see now compared to maybe what you didn't see during the 2024 budget cycle process?
Well, let's back up just a little bit. First of all, you know how complex things are here, and you know that you guys play a very important role. You're the press. Some people see you as an annoyance. We don't. We recognize and we respect your role. It's a key role in this process. And that is key in this piece of dealing with the issue of transparency. But the way we do our business also can shield information or reveal information in a timing sequence that is not useful in terms of understanding what's going on. Because once we deal with the complexities of issues out here, and you know how complex it is, over 1,000 bills are likely to be filed this session. We don't have the benefit of pre-filing anymore. That is something that kind of raises a question in my mind, not encouraging that with respect to that. So that was one of those processes I was a little concerned about. But not only that, the fact of the matter, the timing, making access available, encouraging systems that allow people to come into the process from constituency base and understanding it, we should be opening up the process as much as possible. Now, I'm not leveraging any accusations here. I want you to make sure you understand. This is a difficult and complex piece that we do, and we all fall short here and there. What we're saying is we have to be intentional about this. We're not going to be perfect. We got to do as best we can at every step of the way to make sure that the public is engaged in this process and has an opportunity to understand.
You spoke about the duty of the minority, with the majority setting the agenda as they want it. What does a legislative win look like to you if some of the things you're proposing here don't end up getting approved?
Well, thank you for the question, but it's fundamental to the whole democratic process. You vote, you come out with an outcome. It may not be exactly what you want. Compromise is central to most things that we do, even within parties. But the reality is, and what a lot of people don't understand, is that we engage each other. We have relationships in terms of our interactions and conversations. We impact outcomes that you don't even know we're impacting. And we're going to do the engagement. And that's what we've been doing. That's what we're going to do. But understand, there's no perfection. This is a journey. When we start talking about a more perfect union, we're talking about making a more perfect state in terms of our policy. It's a moving target. And we have, as I've just explained, those dynamics that are affecting us as a state that we cannot control. But we can react to, and we can do it in an appropriate way. I'm not sure that answers your question directly, but once you make that vote, it becomes a policy, it has consequences.
You
From
called?
Louisville, have you talked to Mayor Greenberg about his legislative priorities? Where do you all align?
Yeah, yes, we talk about, you're talking about Louisville. Yes, we talk to Mayor Greenberg frequently about legislative priorities. We make sure we're communicating effectively, and we do it one-on-one, not just sending a note to somebody. Our colleagues here, our colleagues in Lexington do the same thing. They engage. We engage on the local level, and they can speak for themselves. And I encourage you to pull up anyone here to speak on any particular issue. But yes, we engage and communicate effectively, and we talk about those things, and we try to set priorities that are consistent between the two.
Do you have any concerns about legislation that could affect the merger between the city and county in Louisville, given the 2022 Senate Bill 1 lawsuit just came before the Supreme Court?
How'd you sort that out? Have any concern? Hell yeah. You know, whenever we do anything up here, I have a concern. Even when it's good, even if it's with something I embrace, I'm concerned. Did we do it right? Did we write it up right? Who is it going to affect? What's the outcome going to be? Can we call it back? And you know, once you institute a policy, a law, then it's going to be very difficult to call back. It's going to take a lot to revisit that particular issue. So yes, I have concern. I have concern in every single thing that my members do, every single thing that we do, every policy decision that we make, every position that we take. And let me tell you this, we're serious about our business, and we're going to be doubly serious this session because of what has transpired over the last year.
It seems like you and the Republicans usually have different priorities heading into each and every session, but are there some things maybe that you've talked to them or that you've seen previously that you know that this session you can get past and work together?
Well, understand, we work together. Oh, we do that. We talk all the time. I want to make it clear. We talk all the time. You know, it's child's play to not recognize and deal with the realities. That's what we're sitting here to do. We're not sitting here to play games. So, yes, we talk and we communicate. In fact, this press conference is one that we're pushing out to the public so they understand our stand primarily. But last night I was on KET. Nothing inconsistent about our discussion on KET and what's happening right here. You will find no inconsistency in terms of our policy going forward. So we're trying to be clear that this is what we stand for, we're doing our job. But keep in mind that 90, and I'm just going to use this term because it varies, 90% of what we do in the legislature, we agree about. And people lose that sometimes because you get caught in all this cultural, don't let me say what's going through my head, but all that kind of mess, and that really takes us away from staying focused. It tends to divide us for those who champion those things, and what we have to do is get that stuff to the side. We probably come to agreement more than you would imagine, but that doesn't mean that we come to what we would like as the best thing that we could have, because this is a system of compromise. And it's not just between someone who's called a Democrat and somebody who's called a Republican. It's also between the House and the Senate. It's between the the executive and the legislature. In fact, the courts weigh in periodically to set the framework. So this is a very complex process. So it's easy to ask the question. I got to tell you, sometimes it's difficult to answer it because it's a moving target, it's complex, it's a classroom type of thing. Now, if you got 2 or 3 weeks, come to one of my classes. I'll be glad to get into that. But for the sake of this press conference, I would say simply that we work together primarily. We don't agree on all things, and those things we don't agree on, we work to get some rational reasoning in that regard. And when that vote is taken, that vote is taken. We got to go on to the next issue.
You called expanded childcare and universal pre-K economic infrastructure. Is Kentucky at the point where it is critical to take action? And as you guys are speaking with your colleagues here, do you believe that there is enough support to pass the governor's pre-K for all plan?
Well, because it's difficult doesn't mean you don't try. And I don't know if there's enough because we haven't gone through the process. But we always start with that in mind, that this is doable. It has to be, I would like to say, if you don't put it on the table, you can't eat. So we're going to put it on the table, we're going to work for it. But on child care, let me ask Senator Armstrong. I always mess this up. She's going to get me. Chambers Armstrong. Please speak to the child care.
Yeah, so the question was about child care accessibility. I remember when I was pregnant with my first child. I was about 5 months pregnant. And I started calling around trying to get him a place at daycare because I knew I was very lucky to be able to have parental leave, but I would have to go back to work. And as I started calling places in my community, I was told, oh yes, we'd be happy to add you to the wait list. And we can get you a spot in a year or 2 years, or we have 150 names on our list. And I, then like so many families in Kentucky, had to cobble together solutions. That meant family care on some days, that meant putting together different types of daycare. It was this interconnected web that if one thing went wrong, one provider was sick, one family member couldn't help out, a child was ill, it all fell apart and I had to miss work. And I recognized my privilege in knowing that I had paid time off of work. If I had to miss work, I wasn't going to lose my job. At the same time, there are so many Kentuckians who don't have those choices. If they miss work, if they have to call out sick, they're going to lose their job. It's going to compound all the other affordability and economic issues that they're facing. I was fortunate enough to be able to afford childcare. We know that's something the vast majority of Kentuckians struggle with. And so when we look at our low workforce participation rate, particularly our low workforce participation rate for women, we know that that is directly and strongly tied to a lack of affordable childcare options. The last thing I'll say is that childcare is it helps out three different groups. It helps out that parent who wants to go back to work. It helps out our communities because we have folks in those communities able to contribute. What I think about most, the most important group we impact is that child. When those children are able to socialize, engage in those early learning opportunities, learn how to talk about their feelings and pre-literacy activities, recognize shapes and numbers, that sets that child up for success. We look at the number of children who aren't ready for kindergarten, and we know what to do about that. It's invest in universal pre-K, it's invest in early learning opportunities. We have the solution, the data is in. What we need right now is the political willpower, and I'm hoping that our General Assembly comes through this session.
Senator, could you give concrete examples of services or programs that you believe may be reduced or cut out of this budget as a result of all the burdens you guys have touched on?
So right now, I have not had any conversations about child care services being cut. What I'm concerned about is when we look at the cost shifting around Medicaid and around SNAP. We know the same families that struggle to access child care, the same families that struggle to access diapers, because we know 1 out of 3 Kentucky families struggle to access diapers and there's no dedicated fund to pay for those. Those are the same families that as Medicaid costs get shifted, SNAP costs get shifted, and those programs get cut. And we use waste, fraud, and abuse as a way to gut those programs, even though the cuts we are making are significantly more than even the highest sort of estimates of what the waste, fraud, and abuse might be. Those are the families that are going to be hit again and again and again and again. And so everything is going to get a little bit harder. I believe that Kentucky does best when all of our neighbors have an opportunity to thrive and an opportunity to succeed. Right now, that is something that's getting harder every single day because of things that are happening in Washington, D.C. It is our job as the General Assembly to stand up for Kentuckians when Washington, D.C. makes things harder here, and I hope that this legislative session, we see a General Assembly that's willing to do that. I'll yield my time back to Senator Neal.
I didn't necessarily mean child care only. I just meant services, programs in the budget that you guys, and Senator Neal can touch on this. What are some things you fear could see reductions that Kentuckians would feel?
Well, SNAP. 1 in 5 Kentuckians now are hungry, and then we cut food assistance. That's a reduction. If you're talking about Medicaid, when the Medicaid piece gets compromised, that means we have to step in and supplement for that. We're talking about those other policies that affect rural hospitals, even if it doesn't close the hospitals, although they're projecting 35 will. That doesn't mean that it's not going to affect the services that the hospitals that remain are going to provide. They're going to have to make some tough choices in terms of jobs, those that are providing services, and certain types of resources that they would need to provide those things that people need.
So you don't believe Republican leadership will match that funding or step in? You believe ultimately it'll be less than?
Oh, no. You got to understand, I am the perennial optimist. I start every session with the fact that we are going to accomplish the objectives and meet our challenges. I assume that going in. So it's not that I'm saying what they won't do. I'm not going there. I'm saying what we as a legislature should do and what this caucus stands for.
I'm going to just jump in here for a second. I'm Senator Karen Berg, District 26, and you asked a question that I don't think you got the full answer to, and it's because I don't know that we have the full answer in this state, even though we desperately need to know these numbers. Nationally, this one big, beautiful bill, over the course of its 10-year inception, will transfer $900 billion of healthcare costs that have traditionally been covered by the federal government to state governments. $900 billion transfer in cost to cover your most needy citizens with no alteration in anticipated tax structure. So when we pay somewhere between 20 and 50% of our taxes to the federal government to help cover these costs, they're keeping that money. They are not giving that money to the states to cover what they will no longer cover. It will be up to us as a state to figure out how are we going to keep the people in our state housed, fed, and with access to quality health care, which I think we all agree are basic human rights. And when I'm talking about education at that point, what we need, and when we talk about transparency, and I have desperately asked for these numbers in committee, we need to know dollar for dollar, what do we anticipate not to receive in this state, and how do we plan to cover those shortfalls? And this is not a 2-year process. I know we're going into a 2-year bill. Everybody wants to see rosy. We've got plenty of money in the reserve fund. Guys, there are serious fiscal issues that we need to be addressing now with full intent, with full knowledge, and with absolute full transparency as to the dollars this state is going to be impacted by.
Got
Thank
time for
you.
one more question.
Senator Thomas, any Lexington-specific legislative priorities, concerns?
Yes, and thank you for that question. There are two that stand above the rest, although we've got a number of priorities. Number one, Lexington needs a world-class arts facility center. Okay? It's being planned now to have an art center that's the equal what we see in Louisville, the Kentucky Center for the Arts. Lexington is asking that this state promote $30 million toward that project. That's one-time money, okay? And that's it. With that amount of money, we can build a world-class arts theater center where we can have Broadway plays, high-level operas, music concerts, that are second to none. We can do all sorts of arts, creative, world-class activities in that center. That's number one. Number two, we've had a children's museum in Lexington for over 45 years. Okay. It's done a great job. But it's time now that we build a children's museum that will be the envy of the South. We want to do that. Okay. Again, plans have been in the mix. They're in the works. But again, we need state money to provide for that children's museum. We're going to ask the state again for a sum of money in excess of $10 million to provide for that children's museum. There are other priorities I could go on and on, but those two stand above the rest. We need a world-class arts theater center, and we need a national children's museum that is second to none. And so those are the two top priorities in Lexington, budgetary-wise, as we go into 2026. Okay. Senator Neal wants me to address minimum wage quickly if we have time.
We have time.
Okay. I just want to say this. Okay. As we start this session today, I want to say to all of you, 30 states in this country have a minimum wage in excess of $7.25 an hour. 5 of those states are our neighbors. West Virginia, Ohio, Virginia, Illinois, and Missouri, who just last year increased their minimum wage to $13.75. Okay. there's no reason Kentucky, particularly when we know the makeup of Kentucky, should still be saying that all our residents need to be paid at a minimum of $7.25 an hour. Okay? It's been 17 years since this country increased minimum wage. Now, some have said that, the marketplace should dictate what wages are. Well, we said that doesn't work as far back as 1938 when we started the minimum wage. If you go back, the minimum wage has been in existence in this country since 1938, almost 90 years. And if challenged the Supreme Court said that Congress has the authority under the Constitution to pass minimum wage. So we can say that at a minimum, workers should be paid a certain amount of money. No one who wants to work can live on $7.25 an hour. That's shameful. That's wrong. And when you hear comments like, well, our minimum wage is statutorily tied to the federal rate, all that's saying is that we as legislators, we are lawmakers. You all know that. We can change that tomorrow and say, okay, we're going to increase our minimum wage. We don't have to be tied to the federal minimum wage. 30 other states have acknowledged that. Why should we be different? There's no reason why Kentucky should be at the bottom in terms of saying what our workers should be paid. So I'm going to file that bill today. I'm going to push that bill and say workers in Kentucky need to be paid a minimum of $10 in 2026 and work our way up to at least $15 an hour. And in addition to that, say if cities, someone asked about Louisville, cities like Louisville or Lexington, who asked about Lexington, want to have a higher minimum wage, they can do that under state law. I hope I've addressed that question.
Let me point out, Senator Thomas will be filing that bill, but that is a primary position of the caucus. We will all be hand in glove, working hard for that and trying to persuade our counterparts to join us in that. Are there any other questions?
In the interim session, Representative Demas has suggested that the legislature continue another reduction in income tax. What's your position on that, and do you have concerns about that given some of these costs that you're predicting?
Of course, now you already know the answer to that.
Yes.
Look, I said it earlier and I say it now. These things are not disconnected from each other. When you're taking the capacity and ability to bring income in that's consistent, that is at least one of the most progressive ways of doing that, and at the same time, we're being pushed in terms of the shift of obligation locally because of what the the federal government is doing. I mean, that's a perfect storm. And when you're talking about these shifts actually going to those who don't need it with major tax cuts out of the so-called big, beautiful bill, while at the same time depriving those on the ground through these other programs, I think the answer is pretty obvious with respect to that. So I don't know if that doesn't answer the question. I don't know what else I could add to it, but this is not the time to compromise ourselves further in terms of our capacity to meet the challenges that we have. Now let me unless there's a burning question or something, I just want to say a couple of things. I want to make something very clear. We are delighted to work with our counterparts in the Senate. We love the opportunity to represent the people that send us here, and they do too. We talk to them on a frequent level. We don't see them as enemy. We see them as people who may disagree on certain issues or to the degree that we do certain things, and we approach it that way. But we're human beings. So sometimes you see a little friction in an exchange or something like that that gets projected by you guys sometimes. You catch everything that you can, and I'm not criticizing, but put it into context. Most of what we do, we agree on. It's about the degree. Some of the stuff that comes out is intentional. It's driven from the national level. When they got into that anti-DEI stuff and all that stuff, limiting access and support to others that are out there that we obviously know that need it, and then characterize it as something that's divisive in a country that was started divided and reinforced through the years And then when we try to give supports to those who have been adversely affected by that, then you're the divider. What kind of rhetoric is that? That stuff is intentional. That stuff is developed on a national level and pushed down through willing individuals that would do that. That's a divisive thing. That's not useful for us here in Kentucky. We don't need that. What we need are folks like the ones that are standing behind me and folks like counterparts and friends of ours in the Senate that may not be of the same party that we are, working together for the benefit of the Commonwealth. That's what we are about. We think that's what they're about. But every once in a while, that human factor, that political piece gets in there, and that creates the friction that you jump on. We have to deal with that when that happens to the extent we can. But here's what I want to say this good. We're happy to engage this session with our friends. We're happy to represent our constituents. And guess what else we're happy about? We got a new member, Gary Clemens. We're happy about Gary Clemens. I want to say this. Sometimes people run for office and they're not quite ready. They got to sort of learn when they're coming in. And he's going to have to learn. I'm still trying to find my way around the hallways sometimes. But the fact of the matter is, we're just delighted that we have someone that's already engaged in service to people, a workers representative, someone who's very intentional in what he does. And I know I'm probably embarrassing him just slightly, but I'm telling you, big time. Oh, he said, keep it going. I like this guy. Let me tell you something. You all keep an eye on this fella. He knows what he's doing. He's gonna share and bring such substance to what we're doing. So we're delighted about that. Then the last thing I want to say is this: is that we're going to establish a standard time for press, where you can expect us to make statements. We're going to improve our relationship, our communication with you, that transparency issue. We're not joking about that. We're going to make ourselves accessible collectively and individually. I encourage you, you don't have to come through me to get an answer. These people, any one of these people standing behind me could do exactly what I'm doing. And what I'm saying is you should feel free to reach out to them, and I know you will. But we want to make ourselves accessible to you. So we invite you, I invite you, come to me. We have some block in the way, you want to deal with some issue. The only caveat to that is, you ask the question, we give the answer. You ask the question, we give the answer. You might not like it, but then again, you might get some information that's useful for the public to consider. And that's why we prize your involvement, and we want to improve our relationships. So work with us on that, and let's go and do this session the right way. God bless you all for coming out, and have a happy new year.
Thank you.